Okay, we are on lesson 3, and our chapter subject is contracts. Contracts are legally binding agreements that are established between two or more parties. The purpose of a contract is to prevent disagreements between the parties through the defining of obligations, also referred to as the scope of the work, payment terms, and limiting the liability of the parties involved. The best thing is to have a written contract. The state of Oregon requires you to have a contract for a project if it is over $2,000, not 2000, 2001, 2005. Over $2,000, you are required to have a written contract. But as far as I'm concerned, you should have a contract for every project you do. It will eliminate a great many difficulties if you do. Here's our chapter outline. Required contract elements, contractor's license required, contract provisions, provisions to limit risks, contract performance, the owner's right to cancel a contract, breach of contract, damages, types of construction contracts and contracting methods, the source of contracts, making changes to the contract, alternative dispute resolution, contract documents and project manual, legal interpretation, and subcontracting. The required contract elements. Here's what you need to include in your contracts when you begin to write them. A contract has both offer and acceptance. Your offer is your estimate or your bid or proposal. Your offer is accepted when the contract is signed by the two parties involved, or 3 parties. You can have more than 2 parties. Consideration means something of value is exchanged, such as construction services and money. The contract should always clearly indicate what services will be provided in exchange for what amount of money. You must have competent parties. The parties involved must have full use of their mental faculties so that the contract is considered valid. If you're going to be a residential general contractor, you want to watch out for making contracts with individual customers and make sure that as you're talking with them that they seem to have a full understanding of what they are signing. If they don't, your contract could be called invalid. You also need legal purpose. The contract must be possible without causing harm to other people or requiring any illegal activities. Oregon law requires that the contract be made in writing when it is more than $2,000. A contractor must have a current CCB license to write a contract in Oregon. If a contractor's license lapses during a project, he might lose all of his legal rights to defend that contract. Now here's an idea called contract provisions. I think of provisions as paragraphs. A contract must be clear and concise. Your contract should contain provisions, paragraphs, that clearly explain the terms of the contract. Some important provisions that you should include are the contract price, the payment terms, who's going to pay me and when, the obligations of the parties involved, supplementary conditions and terms in case of a breach of contract. A breach of contract means a break in the contract. And those conditions and terms involve what will happen if someone breaches or breaks the contract. Contract pricing. Specify how the contract price was calculated. Was it a lump sum contract, a unit price, or was it a cost plus contract? And specify all the fees the customer must pay. Now let's look at that lump sum. A lump sum contract is the way Lansing Linoleum always bid. We are going to come in and we are going to do this work, carefully explain the work we are going to do, and here is the total price, and that is the price. It's a lump sum. A unit price contract looks like this. I'm going to do all the tub surrounds in ceramic in this large housing project of 275 houses, and I am going to charge $2,000 per unit, per tub surround, and I'm going to bill by the unit. If we complete 5 in a month, we're going to bill for 5. If we do 20, we're going to bill for 20. That is a unit price contract. Or cost plus. Unbelievably, there are numbers of times when this is a useful way for a very large general contractor and a subcontractor to do business. The general contractor says, I will make a contract with you where I will pay all of your actual costs plus an agreed upon profit margin. That's a cost plus contract. The terms of payment must be very specific. Who's going to pay? How much are they going to pay? How and when you expect to get your payment. Specify the amount of retainage and when due. You get your first big commercial contract, you turn in your progress payment, you get your check and you see that it's minus 3% or 5% or 7%. What is that? That's called retainage. The large contractor is holding back a certain amount of your payment, and he is going to pay it to you when. You can specify that. That should be specified in the contract, and those retainage holds are negotiable. So be sure to ask. If the retainage seems high, you want to know, when am I going to get caught up? Are you going to pay me this retainage every 90 days? This is a 9-month project. Or do you insist on holding it to the end? Can't you change that for me? So specify the amount of retainage and when it is due. The final payment. When do I get my final payment? The work has to be completed, the paperwork has to be completed, and the punch list has to be completed in order for me to receive my final payment. So you want to talk about that. When am I going to get paid, and how am I going to make that happen? Here's the idea of a breach or a break of contract. A breach of contract occurs when one of the parties involved does not perform in accordance with any of the terms and conditions of the contract. For example, refusing to execute the contract, not finishing the work within the terms specified in the contract. This is a big one that comes up. They'll give you a finish date. If you don't finish on time, you may be in breach of contract, and you may have a penalty, a daily penalty. I have been on some contracts that had a $3,500 a day penalty for not finishing the work within the term specified. Performing an act prohibited by the contract. Okay, I'm the floor covering sub. I said I was going to do rooms 5 and 6, but instead I did 7. It wasn't supposed to be done. That's a breach of contract. Preventing the other contracting party from carrying out its work. One you may run into with this is you contract for a job, you have a schedule to do it. When you come to the property, it is unavailable to you. Owner has gone to Europe for a month, and you are delayed from carrying out your work. That's an example of preventing the other contracting party from carrying out its work. Now, let's look at the types of construction contracts. The different types of contracts establish who gets the savings in costs and who is responsible when the budget exceeds the amount estimated in the contract. In a lump sum contract, this is the one we used, the contractor agrees to complete the work for a specific price. Now, let me tell you the good and the bad of that. We do a lump sum contract. We go out. We thought it was going to take 3 days, but instead it takes 5 days. But we have made a lump sum contract, so we cannot charge extra for those extra 2 days we were there. We have to have accurate estimating. Now, also, maybe we thought it was going to be a 5-day job, but it turned out to be a 3-day job. Now we don't owe any give back for the 2 days that we gained. So we take responsibility for both the overages and we win with performing ahead of our estimate. The next one, a unit price contract. A price is determined for each unit, and the customer is billed for units completed. Pretty straightforward. The cost plus contract. The contractor is paid actual cost plus an agreed upon markup. This is a very safe way to do business. A lot of floor covering stores who had large crews, 50 to 100 crew members, would take these kind of contracts with their large customers so that they would know that their costs would be covered and they would have a modest markup on a large body of work so that everyone could be working at a base level. Very advantageous at times. Depending on the level of participation in a construction project, different methods are used to establish a contract. Here are the 2 most common contract methods. First one is single prime. This is when the contractor builds from an architect's design. This is a very common contract method. You will have a design group or an architect who creates a building, and that will get handed over to the contractor to build from the architect's design. The next most common contract method is called design/build, where one company completes the whole project from start to finish. They do the design, they sell the job, do the design, and then they do the build out. Design build. Sources for contracts. Where are you going to find a good contract? Standard forms for contracts are available from many sources. Certainly, they're online, including the websites of the associations below. You can look on the website for the American Institute of Architects. You can also look on the Associated General Contractors website, which is where I got my contract that I use for commercial work. Our primary residential contract was an amalgamation of a bunch of different contracts that we had, and we grew into it over the years and added provisions that were very specific to our work. Making changes to the contract. Okay, I've got the job and I'm out there working. Now I want to make a change to the contract. To make changes to a contract, a change order must be made in writing and agreed upon between the owner and the contractor. Now this applies to your small projects as well. Small residential projects, you get out, you have a contract, you have specified your scope of work, you know exactly what you're supposed to be doing, and the owner approaches you and says, well, you're here, can you also do this? That requires a change order in writing and agreed upon between the owner and the contractor. Both need to sign, and then that gets added to the contract. Now, there's a type of change order that's made prior to the award of the contract. Okay, you've received the contract, but now you get an addendum, something that adds on. And this is prior to the award of the contract. That change is called an addenda. Change orders made after the contract has been signed and executed, but are called modifications. Modifications. Change orders made after the contract has been signed and executed are called modifications to the contract. To resolve a legal dispute without the need to go to court, which you want to do because it is time consuming and it is negative energy to be in court, so we want to try to find ways to resolve our legal disputes without going to court. There are 4 basic types of alternative dispute resolution. 1, negotiation. 2, mediation. 3, collaborative law. And 4, arbitration. In negotiation, it is simply a dialogue that is established between the parties involved to resolve a dispute. This is the first step and the most economical option. When you run into a problem with your customer when you've started the contract, you need to sit down and negotiate if there are difficulties and try to resolve the dispute yourself. The most economical option available, negotiation. Watch a few YouTube videos because you're going to want to learn to become a good negotiator. Next step, mediation. This is when this dialogue now is facilitated by an independent professional mediator. Google them. They are available. Independent professional mediators. They sit down with the two of you and see if they can reach an agreement. You're going to have some costs involved in mediation, but far less than going to court. Next step, that didn't work. Now we have collaborative law, where the dialogue is facilitated by the attorneys of the parties involved. You can hear that meter running, and we are getting more charges as we go up the line. We're going to have to pay 2 attorneys to settle this dispute. It's called collaborative law. Next step, arbitration. This uses a third person who works as an arbitrator. Often this would be a retired attorney or a judge. Decisions taken when arbitration is used are legally binding. So I'm not going to court, But I agree that when I go and see the arbitrator and my customer comes too, we're going to tell our sides of the story. The arbitrator is their mind what is fair, and we agree before we start that whatever their decision is, it will be legally binding on the two of us. Here's a concept for you: legal interpretation. This refers to the moment in the dispute when we are going to court and the judge is going to look at our contract to see if it is a proper contract. What do we want to do with our contracts to make sure that that legal interpretation from that judge comes out in our favor? Use plain language. Use plain language to establish your intent. That's what you're going to do in a contract. Avoid disputes and ensure an appropriate legal interpretation in the event of a legal action. In certain situations, it is recommended to use the services of a lawyer to draft that original contract. When we were working on restoration and housing stock, maybe 1940s houses particularly, we sometimes used an attorney to help us write up a very specific contract for a restoration project where we knew we were likely to run into challenges to our scope of work. Most of the time, you're going to do well writing your own contracts, but remember to use plain language when you write your contracts so that when a judge gets a hold of your contract and wants to interpret it, it is perfectly plain to him what you intended to do.